We are going to move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is David Halcovitch. David is the former police chief of the Hanover Police Department. He has worked nationally and internationally as an advisor, investigator, and trainer, and also found time to be the on-ground manager of a security company. David's presentation is entitled What's Old is New and New is Old, and looks at how the roles of police and security personnel have changed over the decades. David, over to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to finish up with a comment on Joseph's stuff. I've had a company which I closed because of the insurance rates were that ridiculous because they didn't understand how the security industry went. So it's a real problem, I think, for the insurance industry. Anyways, let's get into my stuff. I thank Dr. Jensen for having me here today, and good afternoon, Your Honor, because it's great to have somebody from the bench here as well and hear what we're saying, because then you've got some background. Because I think with my over 40 years in policing and security, I have some understanding of stuff, and not the greatest understanding, but I've sat in different chairs and worn different hats and done different positions to be able to say, this is pretty good or this is pretty bad. I'm not putting up a fancy presentation. I get to sit at my kitchen table and do a fireside chat with you. Throughout that career, as I did, I started as a cadet, the lowest rank, finished as a chief of police, pretty good. But I'm the only chief who's done a disbandment of a municipal service back to its original service. So out in Surrey, they've got something with the RCMP, where in Ontario, we had two municipalities had a policing service, and one no longer wanted to be in it. I can say honestly that that's been a great experience, and I was hired for my labor background. I have a master's in criminal justice, so I think I can speak to some stuff of the law, maybe certainly not from a judge's perspective, but from a legal perspective as well. So in the disbandment, that service still stands alone today, which is great. So on the security side, I started in a very different way. I started at the top and worked my way back to the front line. So I was hired to deal with a security group in the Middle East, which right now we all know what's happening. I was in Abu Dhabi. All of these types of circumstances come back because now we're in Canada and have some of this stuff happening. I did the UBC as the manager, actually director that was intern, and 18 months later, they finally got somebody to take my position. So I started at the top. I've done a lot of strikes. I've been involved in PI work, but I just finished in Nunavut doing frontline security work, which was in the hospital and healthcare system all over Nunavut, which was probably, out of everything I've done, one of the most interesting experiences around. So let's deal with some of this topic. I can appreciate what John has done for me because he's paved the way on a lot of the issues that we know about and can feel, especially from the economic side. The police and security are both commodities. So when we say a commodity, they're both trying to get a share of the market, which will be the public safety and security. Both have different mandates of what they work under. Both have different regulatory sides they fall under, but both are accountable to the Constitution of Canada and to the law. Police and security leaders both are trying to build trust, in a moment of crisis, but they got to cultivate that through consistent and transparent engagement. They must also recognize that that trust is just not static effort, but a complex and dynamic relationship that requires continuous investment, humility, and innovation. The community trust is usually led and controlled by the police apparatus of a community. But you have the police being the main keeper of safety and security, but ultimately security is playing a minor role. That's in the past. A good example is at large sporting events. If you went to a hockey game, a baseball game, a football game, you had actions taking place in the community, the police were heavily involved. Now, Its security is involved. The police are still there, but in far less numbers. So that's the old. When you think about how the police dealt with most issues, they were the people that were out patrolling the streets. They responded to alarms, calls for service for parking enforcement, bylaws such. They dealt with people in violent confrontations. A police officer had to go to the Ontario Police College, had to do in-service training, field training, and with over 6 months of that training, which included use of force and self-defense. The police arrested and charged people to deal with those criminal offenses. So again, this is something that's still continuing, but certainly not to the same extent. So now the police have removed themselves from a number of duties that they used to do, or there's a chargeback for the customer. If you have the example of an open signal, an alarm for a business, if that is a false alarm, the company can get a fee for the police for responding, or sadly, they get cut off and not respond at all. In other communities, the police do limit it, if any, parking or by law enforcement. They leave that up to the agents. So back in the past, security did patrols in such locations like malls, office buildings. They were bouncers at the entrances to a certain location, but extremely limited on what they had to do. They had no official training or certification was required to be a security officer. So you receive some on-the-job training, what you might need. In most cases, very little about the law or use of force. You called the police and they took over the matter and dealt with the criminal charges when responding. So now you have security is responding to a lot of those open signals, those alarms on a mobile patrol. Parking and by law enforcement is being conducted by security hired by the local community. When security is patrolling a mall with jewelry stores, they may now actually encounter armed robberies with smash and grabs and shootings, which are happening quite regularly if you read the news or hear the news. Yes, in the past that could have happened, but it was certainly a lot less than it was today. It's obvious that security is playing a larger role in most communities. What may not be obvious to the community is that the police, and if security is conducting functions that the police used to do, the community is still paying for both. And that's the one side that, going back to John's side of this, the costs are what this is all about. I think most people understand that we're following police budget processes. And I think that most people understand that these are increasing dramatically, but some of their core functions have decreased, but other areas have become more complex. So this cost of policing has gone up with less being provided. So importantly, security has picked up a number of these duties and filled that void of the police, at least in sight and belief. This is not to be critical of the police. The cost of policing is expensive. I understand it. I've sat in that role that had to go and get budgets. Let me tell you, it's like pulling teeth to get money from the municipality. It doesn't matter the size of the community. The budget is still being set by the local police commission and then put into the municipal councils. And you have to get paid to run your service. And that's where I think that, the price of investigations has gone up and the court processes are complicated and expensive now. But that's always been a piece to it, far more now. When I say to you, as a police officer, they still need to go to the Ontario Police College. They still get their regular in-service and use of force training. They take other courses where required. And remember, all of this is paid for by the police. Security has only changed slightly in these past 20 years, where now you have a 40-hour training course in Ontario that is completed and then you pass the test to get your security license. The license is paid by the security officers and they are not paid to take that training. then some of the security companies give some basic training to do to deal with the security officers' actual duties that they'll perform. Bottom line, 1 week of training is required for the amount of time, is what it appears, compared to approximately 6 months on the police side. So in comparison, there really isn't a comparison on what training and where the costs come, because in the policing side, there's yearly training and updating. The laws do change. They have to be updated on such. They have to do in-service work on their weekly duties of what they're getting. So the sad side is, remember, security only has to do that 1 week security course. Are they updated on constitutional law that arrest, search, and seizures have changed, that a criminal code section has changed, what you need, what you're doing for taking statements and evidence? All of those factors are not something that security would get. Well, you say, well, the security doesn't charge people. Well, actually, I disagree. I remember when way back, we would take and go to a shoplifting in a store. The police would arrive. The store detective had stopped and grabbed somebody for stealing, and the police laid the charge, and they dealt with the court process. Now, in many jurisdictions, the security operative has to deal with the stopping and then puts all the paperwork together for the charge. And then sometimes in certain jurisdictions has to give it to the Crown Prosecution Office or Crown Attorney's Office to authorize the charges. So they are taking statements. They are dealing with putting that together. So that's just one example. But the simplest one is communities are hiring security to be the bylaw enforcement, the parking enforcement. Many communities have hired the commissionaires to do parking enforcement in that community. They're security officers under the Act. So, and more specifically, certain communities are hiring security officers to do those bylaw duties. They're out there patrolling around in a municipal car, dealing with certain offenses that take place, especially in high-risk zones where there's noise complaints and such. So I think that we have to look at the community is paying for those duties. Doesn't matter if it's the police or security, but somebody or someone is still fulfilling those obligations. So I think that when you are putting the bang for the buck, the communities have to look at how much is being spent on policing, how much is being spent on security. And that's where if it's out in the actual community security and not just their infrastructure or locations, then we have to think of how that budgeting goes. I'm not going to suggest one's right or wrong. The community has to find the happy median that they can deal with to support the proper security and enforcement within their own areas. But as you just said, what does it take to become that security officer? 40 hours of a course. If you do a little bit of study and you pass the test, you've got a license. You can be hired by anybody in the province of Ontario. And just as John said, as a minimum starting out, many security officers are being paid a minimum wage, a minimum value. They don't have any experience. They took a course. It's an extra job that they can hold, that they can fill in, or it's not their career. And I think that there's many security type people that I've met over my journey now that have been long-term security people. They've never been in policing. They've never been in the military. And that's what I can say for that now, having been on the police side, coming into security. It's something at least that I've got some good understanding of the law and your use of force options and such. So that's where I'm still big on this training stuff. I think that security needs to have a minimum wage, like I saw when working in the Middle East. And that's why with the piece that you just said through John all those costs either need to be regulated, mandated, or somehow filtered into a costing system that you can provide certain levels of security. Yes, some security just push a button. Some security are just at a door. But as you say, some of these security officers working in malls, wearing bulletproof vests, carrying handcuffs, are dealing with high risk circumstances. And are they obliged to become involved? That's a good question. Think of that one. And it's going to be a hard one to answer because they only have the citizens' use of force options. So let's get back to the training. That's why we're all here. We're all involved with CASP. I mean, I think CASP is a way that we can talk to government to try to improve the regulatory requirements, get minimum standards. If anybody was here right at the beginning, His Honor was talking about he's involved with a group that's trying to get police to a college level, and I agree completely. We need to improve people who entrust our rights and freedoms to a better level and a higher standard than what they may or may not be at today. Because if anybody's ever been arrested, anybody ever gone to jail, you know that there's rules to play by. And I mean, I dealt with some pretty bad people in my time, and most of them had the respect. I was on that side, they were on the bad side. If they got away with it, it was great. But if they got caught, I had rules to play by, and they respected that you did. So you see, these are things that now, how do you get the security, which is the first people that are dealing with a situation? If it's a robbery in a mall or if it's a bad assault in a mall, they're the first people on the scene generally. What are they doing and what do they understand that they need to do to then bring the matter that may eventually go to a court system and have somebody presiding over it and understand that they need to do certain things appropriately? It could be collecting evidence, it could be handing evidence over, it could be taking statements, whatever it might be. They need to get some training if they're going to be put in that spot. But it has a cost. And as John said, bottom line is these costs are not what anybody who's hiring security wants to get involved in. So that's why I think it's going to have to be mandated. I just read a recent article by Steve Hoffman, who is a security president of British Columbia. Someone may know, great person, really knows his stuff, and he puts stuff out. Organizations that rely on private security have the responsibility to ensure their personnel understand the limits of their authority and the appropriate use of force, are trained to assess risk in real time with strong dynamic assessment training that helps them make sound decisions in the field, when to engage, when to prioritize de-escalation, and when situations need you to withdraw and monitor, are supported by appropriate training with clear policies, supervision, and realistic expectations, and are not deployed into environments or situations that are unsafe and beyond the scope of their training and their role. But that's what we're asking security to do these days. They're being put in roles that the police used to do. They're out there being visible. Security officers and security staff are in a uniform usually. They have something of marking that says they are a security group. And most people don't understand their role and their obligations and their legal status on what they can and cannot do.
2 minutes,
Right?
David.
So that's where, sorry?
2 minutes, David.
Yep. So in that's where we have to get that training to a level and to a level that is acceptable for the safety of those officers and the communities they serve. So good security isn't about presence. It's about the preparation, training, and responsibility of the oversight. So bottom line, we need to invest in the training for security. And this is why we have CASP as an organization for this training, but also to lobby for government regulation and oversight, which we need to look at and how we can support them in doing that. So as I say, this is not a session down memory lane or to pick on the police for their budgets. It's who pays for security of the positions supported by security officers and what municipality section pays for it. So in it, I appreciate the time and energy of that. I don't know if this question that's in the box is for me about do we see lots of security going into policing? I'll try to answer that in a minute. But that's the end of my section. So I appreciate John's opening because it opens your eyes to the costing and bottom lines of who's being hired. It doesn't always mean the best people are, but can those best people be trained up to a level that can make everybody equal and keep us all safe and secure in our community?